near Cucamonga and drive towards each other. Well, one rides a bike and the other one drives, a jet plane. And they have to calculate how fast before they meet here in the middle, right? And who's going to go the farthest, the fastest, and all of that kind of stuff. So, it's not a math problem here, but people coming from two different sides and converging at the same point. That's what the proverb is describing right here. On the one hand, you have the man who oppresses the poor to increase his riches. And on the other, you have the man who panders to the rich in order to curry favor. But it's funny, both wind up at the same place. And that place, the proverb describes as want. Just the opposite of what they were aiming for, right? It's like, one side starts in, I don't know, some town in Illinois. I'm trying to think of towns in Illinois. Rockford. We'll just say Rockford. I'm just random town. They start in Rockford, start driving west, and then somebody else starts in, some cornhole, Wyoming, and drives east. And they both planned to meet at the Mississippi River, but instead they both wind up in a ditch, the same ditch. Right? Not the ditch that they were planning to get to, but they both wind up in the ditch. That's the idea right there. You thought you were going to get to something great and magnificent, but you wound up in a pit here. That's what the Bible is saying here. Both end up in the same poverty, as the proverb points out. Now, the sin described here is called avarice. It's an old word, avarice, that we could describe as an inordinate desire of gaining and possessing, covetousness, greediness, or insatiable desire of gain. Now, it's interesting because both the guy who oppresses the poor and the guy who greases the skids with the rich are both seeking the same thing. They're both seeking advancement, personal advancement, and self-prosperity. It is a self-help plan. They don't have this in the bookstore in the self-help section, how to oppress the poor and please the rich. They don't have that book. Maybe we could write it someday. Maybe it would be a bestseller. Who knows? People would be into it. People are into it, but they don't need to read the book on it. It's interesting, too, because I talk about them starting at two different perspectives, but in fact, a lot of times it's the same guy. The same guy who oppresses the poor is the guy who turns around and seeks to endear himself to the rich, and all for the sake of his own advancement. Avarice, the homilist said, fattens on the miseries of poverty. The interest of others is nothing to the avaricious man in comparison with his own. He would be ever receptive, never communicative. Avarice, whilst tyrannic to the poor, is servile to the rich. The wealth it gets, it employs with a miserable, crawling baseness to win the favor and command the smiles of the wealthy and the great. A fawning sycophancy will eat out the true manhood of the civilized world. Souls bow down before the glitter of wealth and the pageantry of power. Now, this proverb is presented as a declarative sentence. This is a sentence you notice. So it is telling you what shall be. Okay, this is the way it goes. And the Bible is giving it as a statement of fact. This is the outcome. Okay, you can put it down, you can mark it down, you can take it to the bank, you can cash the check will clear. This is the way it will go, all right? The people who oppress the poor in order to be rich, and the people who seek to gain the favor of the rich by means of gifts, both will end up in poverty. It's a declarative statement, but it is also a promise. There is an element of promise in this because God is telling you the end. This is how it goes. Now, it may not seem like it, at least initially. For a long time, it may not seem like it. But, that's the way it is. Quite often in life, our experience is that God delays, right? Now, his delays are not to be trifled with. The fact that God is restraining himself, the fact that God is currently holding back his hand and not striking you with it, is not a reason for you to continue in the sin. It is, in fact, a warning to you that the longer he holds back and restrains his hand and you don't repent, the closer you are coming to the appointed hour in which the smack will land. So God says that this is where it's headed, right here. Now, it may be a poverty in this life. More likely, it is a poverty in the life that is to come. And there is a poverty that is much more devastating than any poverty you might experience in this life. Poverty in the life that is to come. Poverty in eternity. When you find yourself not just in the pit of despair, which many people have found themselves in this life, but in the pit of hell for eternity. This is an important thing for us to understand and recognize. The parallelism in this proverb is unique because the proverb has three parts instead of the usual two. And now really it's interesting how it converges on this poverty. The two seemingly contrasts here between the guy who oppresses the poor and the guy who seeks to enrich the rich, which seems like a strange thing, right? They're both going to be in the same place at the end. The Hebrew of the proverb is difficult, and the translation, I think, has done a wonderful job of expressing for us what really is being said here. But Kyle and Delich explain it this way: he who extorts from the poor enriches himself thereby, but he who gives to the rich has nothing and less than nothing thereby. He robs himself, has no thanks, only brings himself by many gifts lower and lower down. I don't think that's entirely off, but I think that it neglects something important here. We'll get to that. The pulpit commentary says that the interpretation in the speaker's commentary is more plausible. The oppressor of the poor will himself suffer in similar mode, and will have to surrender his ill-gotten gains to some equally unscrupulous rich man. All right? So there's always someone higher up the food chain, right? There, and that's, I think there's some truth to that explanation of it. Again, we'll come back to that later on, but just reminding you that as a man soweth, he shall also reap. That law of sowing and reaping is not limited to a couple of things, but it is a universal law of the kingdom. There, you do reap what you sow with that. The word oppressive means to mistreat, to defraud, to cheat, to rob. Covetousness drives this cheating and extortion. The wealthy Berean shorts the pay of his employees, defrauds them of just wages. They he is not really, and this is something that I think that we need to think about and consider, that if your employees are really good and your product is really great and they are making you a fine profit, that they should share in the profits there. I understand that an employer hires you at an agreed upon rate, but when you are making him significant money, you should be rewarded significantly for it, and so on. And that would be true in any business venture as well, that we ought to take care of the people who take care of us. And they should share in the profits. It shouldn't be, we have companies where the low tier employees, though they've worked there for many years, need to supplement their income with food stamps and housing assistance and welfare. And the people at the top, the CEOs and the executives, man, they negotiate a sale of the company and then get a golden parachute on the way out the door, worth millions of dollars. There shouldn't be that kind of disparity there. There should be some justice in it. And I don't begrudge the fact that there are people who have a great deal of experience in these kinds of things and are worth a lot of money, but the laborer is worthy of his hire, and there ought to be consideration given to the fact that this company, really your employees are investment. Just like my boss always said I always say my boss, but the guy I worked for when I was in college, who was one of those savvy kind of guys and just had a lot of business smarts. And he would always say, you can't sell from an empty cart and things like that, where you have to spend money to make money, he would say. And really, you are a commodity to them, or your employees are a commodity to you. They are out there making you money, and you have a right to expect that you will profit off of their labor and their work. You're paying them, but everything that a business owner does, he wants to turn a profit on. So he needs to make more money than what he's paying you so he can afford to pay you. And you should want that, by the way. But we're talking about where there's an inequity between this guy is making us a fortune right here and we're paying him pennies. All right? That's partly what this is talking about here. That little heart that just shrivels up. And at this time of year, we all think of the Grinch, right? Whose heart was, 10 times too small? This kind of thing happens with people. And by the way, the more that a wealthy man, or the more that a guy withholds what is due, the smaller his heart becomes. It just keeps shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. This kind of avarice motivated the mines in the old days of the West. The mines, the coal mines, the silver mines, the gold mines. The owners would, people, I've talked about this before, but they would pay the company coin. They called it the company coin. That company coin was only accepted at the company store, which was also owned by the mine. And so you would get paid the company coin. You couldn't spend it anywhere except at the company store. And then they would inflate the prices in that store tremendously. And so it became a commonplace. Anyone who worked for a mining operation for any length of time would typically, I think the average employee would be 1 month behind, 1 month in debt at least to the company store, because they would go into the company store and they would buy with the company coin, but they would jack the prices up so much that they wouldn't be able to buy all that they needed. And so then the company store developed an ingenious method of giving you credit, but then of course, the old song, I owe my soul to the company store, that's where that comes from. that they were never going to get out of that. They were in a kind of slavery. They lived in the company house. The company built the houses for the people, and the saddest, to me, the saddest part of the whole story was when miners would die in mining accidents, and the next day their widow would get an eviction notice and be out on the street with nothing because there was no money because they owed the company store. That's the kind of thing this is talking about. That kind of thing that is wicked. It's an abomination in the eyes of God. God cannot turn a blind eye to it or be okay with that sort of thing. This is a wicked, wicked thing. And then when you pair that kind of blatant covetousness that motivated this kind of abuse of the poor, when you couple that with the fact that the owners and managers of those mines would then turn around and pay rich dividends to their shareholders and investors, that's the full picture of what this proverb is talking about. Because they built a lot of wealth for their investors. And their their stockholder meetings would be, just opulent and gaudy in the kind of celebrations they would have. So that's the other side of the issue. The rich dividends, the handsome profits that come out of oppressing the poor and needy. And that just rounds out God's disgust and hatred of this kind of thing. It's not like that would never happen today. We have, major companies, popular companies, that buy off the left to prevent them from burning their factories down, and then get all their labor done on the cheap in third world countries where the people are super, and then they inflate their prices on their clothing. You go into these major brands, many of them where the clothing is made over in some third world country in the Far East or South America or Africa or something like that. And you go in there and they've got shirts that are $80 or $100 for a shirt, a single shirt. That still staggers me. And I say to my wife that even my exclamation when I see the price tag, I know all the snobs who are in there shopping are looking at me like, what kind of rube is that? He doesn't belong in the store. And I'm thinking, yeah, I don't belong in that store. Because there is never, ever, ever a day where I would pay that kind of money for a shirt. And I can go to the store and buy that same for a couple bucks. So that's how I'm doing it. Then I can wear your shirt and you didn't make any money. I win on that. I look like I'm rich. There's a reason they allow themselves, and this is the thing. We see this in our country. These check cashing places, payday loan places that are charging sometimes 1,000, 2,000% interest on the loan that they give you. And they are, almost across the board, they are owned by Zions Bank, U.S. Bank, Chase Bank. All the big banks are the ones who bankroll those payday loan centers. Do you think that the check cashing place, the big sign that says check cashing, you think that some, evil slumlord? No, it's J.P. Morgan Chase. It's those people that are doing that, all right? And keeping the poor in abject poverty, keeping them in constant debt. And that's the game today. Credit, low monthly payments, you'll never be debt free. That's the objective with this stuff here. Grasping men, extend the palm to the rich and the boot to the poor. And that's why we have in America today what we call the donor class. They're the ones that get what they want because they give the money. They give and they give. You know, there's a lot of this kind of stuff that goes on in our country. And it's not like the Democrats are the ones that are doing that and the Republicans are not. Go do some study, go do your McConnell, one of the most powerful Republicans in the country. And the way that he extorts money and the way that he uses it to manipulate, not for the good of the country. Like Mitch McConnell, I'm sure when he first ran for office, had the good of the country in mind. But for the last 20 years or so, when he's been in power, he's had one thing in mind and only one. And that is to enrich himself. That's it. His desire for power is entirely self-serving. The whole thing. We need that this kind of thing is a plague in our country, though it is not unique to our country. It has been in place throughout the history of mankind. People have lived this way, and that's why we need to understand it, because God expects something different from his people. John Gill says that they do this, that they may protect him in the possession of his ill-gotten riches. They press the palm of every powerful politician that they can access. And they do it to protect him in the possession of his ill-gotten riches. That's what it's about. They donate the money in order to protect themselves so that people will turn a blind eye to what they're doing. They will not only, this Matthew Henry said, they not only will not relieve the poor, but they oppress them, rob the spittle, extort from the poor tenants and neighbors, invade the rights of those who have not wherewithal to defend themselves, and then give bribes to the rich to protect and countenance them in it. But it is all in vain. They shall come to want. And that's the point here that the proverb is making. I know that when they have power, they use it to trample on the poor. They turn the poor into the ladder, the stairway that they climb to reach the top. They pay off, they buy off the authorities around them to make sure that they are protected, to make sure that they will not have their wealth taken from them. But God says they will come to want. Isn't it interesting? You listen to politicians, okay, this is what they say. We're going to tax the super rich, they say. Now, they talk very tough. They talk a good game when they're talking to we the people about the millionaires and the billionaires. But you know what else they do? They invite all the millionaires and the billionaires to a $50,000 a plate meal where you will have an opportunity to shake my hand, press my palm a little bit, and let me know what's really on your mind. That's what they do. They go with a handout to the rich, and then they go and tell you, we're going to make it all better. We're going to take their money from them and give it to you. Now, they've been saying that for a while, haven't they? How much of that have you gotten? No. I haven't gotten much yet either. Yeah, that's it. The check's in the mail. That's right. My dividends are coming. The influence and clout they wish to obtain by their largesse winds up in the same pit as the wealth they hope to have by oppressing the poor. It all, they're circling the drain from different sides. Have you ever been to one of those? They have this at the Air Force Museum. One of those. It's like a little funnel, and it has a little thing you put the penny in, and then the penny rolls around and around. Have you ever done that? It's fun to do it. It's fun to do the chasers. Huh? You put one in, then you put the other one in, and they're opposite each other, right? And it's mesmerizing. It goes around, and then before you can stop it, it's gone. That's the way it goes. That's the way it goes for them. They're circling the same drain. That's what the Bible's saying here. The proverb says that he shall surely come to want. The word surely is used to emphasize the poverty he's headed towards. He's like the man who planted $100 bills in his backyard. Not only did they not grow extra $100 bills, they disintegrated into dirt as well. Some have suggested that the proverb gives the sense of a man who uses extortion to wring money from the poor and then finds himself wrung out by the rich. John Gill said, he shall be forced to give it to another richer than he and of greater power, and so shall get nothing by his oppression of the poor. But as he served the poor, so shall he be served himself, and be brought to beggary and want. Now, that's a kind of play we've had going on for a long time in this whole the rich kind of thing. They keep promising it. Joe Biden was the first one to really go after it and really keep that promise. And you know what the result was? It's amazing. You know what the result was? Your gas prices went up, your grocery prices went up, your utility prices went up. It all went up. Do you know why it went up? Because the rich guys who control that stuff, they said, that's cutting into our profit margins. We're going to have to pass that along. So they did. They passed it along to you. So guess what? All the taxes that they charged them, you paid those. And that's another way that the poor are oppressed and the rich are enriched. If a person makes more than, look, this is not economics 101. Let's do economics for a minute. All right? If I'm making $400,000 a year, that means I've got some significant skin in the game. I've got a little power to control. All right? If I'm a billionaire, I'm probably in that because I own some companies. And there's one unique feature of every single business owner is universally true. They exist to make money. They exist to make money. And you know what they do? They hire people to make up charts to show them how their profits are doing. And when profits dip, guess what happens? They raise prices. Because they've got to make up. So they raise their prices, and guess who pays those prices? You pay those prices. The problem is that those guys with a $400,000 a year or more, they have the power to pass those taxes along to you. They're never going to pay them. Literally, the politicians persuade the people to vote in their own poverty. One commentary said, tyranny and flunkeyism generally go together. Both are the children of avarice. He that proudly domineers over the poor will servilely bow his knee to the rich. And that sounds like politicians. Like, you could just put a politician, just plug them right into that statement. It reminds me that God does have a sense of humor, a twinkle in his eye, and a very special way of getting out of the way while we put on our clown suit and makeup. I also will laugh at your calamity, saith the Lord, and the way of sinners is hard. You are not to live in order to get. You are not to live to get. You are to live to give. The man who digs a pit for his neighbor, it's funny how this happens. He forgets where he put it. And then he falls into it. Covetousness is itself so monstrous that nothing else is like it except it be death and the grave, the only things I know which are always carrying off the spoils of the world and never making restitution. This is a true picture of the avaricious man who regards none of the needs and rights of his fellow creatures, but only asks himself with regard to them how they can best be made to serve his interests. This leads him to grind down those who are poorer than himself and use them as so many stepping stones by means of which he can mount higher in the social scale, forgetting that though their poverty makes them weaker than himself, they have a friend who is far stronger than he is. Oh, this is something for us to keep in mind, that if God's eyes are on men, they are especially on the poor. And God will avenge the poor who are oppressed. You don't want to get on the wrong side of that equation. So here are a few points for us to take home. Number one, take heed and beware of covetousness. Covetousness, it's interesting because covetousness is the last of the Ten Commandments. And some have said that it is the summary of all the commandments. There is an element of covetousness in every one of the Ten Commandments. An element of covetousness, well, the Bible calls covetousness idolatry. So that covers the first, 3 commandments. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not take unto thee any graven image, right? Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Well, what causes men, what's the most common cause for men disregarding the Sabbath day, except that they wish to line their pockets? They miss out on the profits that come when they are remembering the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Honor thy father and thy mother. Well, there's so much covetousness that drives us to dishonor and disparage our parents and disobey them. And then, of course, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. All of those things that really, there's a shade of covetousness that is either overt or covert in every one of those things. Covetousness is a sneaky sin. It moves us to do surprising things, things that we didn't expect or anticipate. James paints a sad picture of a church that condescends to the poor and grovels to the rich. That when a poor man comes in and says, sit over here, stay out of the way, right? Sit in this back corner back here where you won't smell up the place. And then the rich man comes in his nice clothes, and we all pander to him and cater to him and act like, he's exactly who we were looking for and try to draw him in. This is the kind of thing, this is a wicked kind of thing that takes place in churches, but it's all driven by covetousness. That's the way it is. How can we fall into this kind of small-mindedness? Of course, it isn't corrected by coddling the poor and rejecting the rich either. The bottom line is that God does not want you to have respect of persons at all. Not at all. It should not be a part of us. That rich guy has an eternal soul the same as the poor guy. The rich guy's eternal soul will wind up in a place, either heaven or hell, that will not depend on how much he had in this life, but will depend on the way he responded to the gospel call. Did he repent and believe or not? There's the same route for both rich and poor that must go through the Lord Jesus Christ alone. And as a church, we have a responsibility here to reach the souls of men, whether they be rich or poor, whether they have much to offer or little, whether they will be a hard project or fit in easily into the body. We have a duty and a responsibility to care for them, to love them, and to bring them to the Lord Jesus Christ. God hates respect of persons of every kind, and respect of persons is always, always driven by covetousness. Always. Second point of application, though the proverb doesn't state it directly, we should be operating by a very different principle than what is described in this proverb. Charles Bridges said, if oppression is the road to poverty, is not liberality the way to riches? Isn't that what the Bible says? There is that giveth, and yet increaseth. And there is that withholdeth more than is meet, and yet it tendeth only to poverty. This is something we need to understand. We need to recognize the fact that our giving, God rewards, God repays. God never says, good for you, you gave all that money, now I don't know where you're going to make up for it. He never says that. God says, go ahead and try me. Find out, see, if I won't open the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing on you that you can't contain. That's what he says. Not urging you to be fools in giving, but I am urging you to be faithful in giving. To have some faith in that, to trust God in it, and to open up your hand and give. The poor are not pavement on your road to success. All right? The poor are the ones that you're to help along the way. Remember the earlier proverb? See, this is the thing. We try to curry favor with the rich, and we view the poor as existing to serve our purposes, but we ought to instead approach both rich and poor with humility. And that's what the earlier said here in Proverbs 22. Back at the beginning of the chapter, this is, months ago when we looked at this, verse 2, Proverbs 22:2. The rich and poor meet together. The Lord is the maker of them all. There's an idea in that when we talked about that proverb. There is that idea that the rich and poor are both necessary to each other. We need each other. We need the rich. We need the rich. We should not despise them. We should definitely not foster envy towards them. That's ungodly. Or malice towards them. And by the way, when politicians tell you they're going to raise the poor or raise the taxes, on the millionaires and the billionaires. They're feeding into the natural envy that you have. And if your response is, yeah, stick it to them, you don't really understand what's going on. And you don't understand the way politicians are using your own sinful tendencies and attitudes against you, weaponizing them against you. We should not be shy about our place or value in this world. This is the thing, brothers and sisters. It doesn't matter if someone makes more money than you or less money than you. It doesn't matter if someone has more things or nicer things than you. It doesn't matter. You should be able to look every man in the eye because you walk in your integrity, because you're going to work hard in your life and you're going to take care of what God gives you and be thankful for it. And if you come across a guy who's a multi-billionaire and likes to flaunt all of that, it should not intimidate you at all. You're a child of the King. He owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. He's preparing a place for you in heaven. And this billionaire who likes to wear all his billions on his, back, his jewelry, his car, his house, likes to put on the display, that may be the greatest amount of wealth he'll ever enjoy. And if it is, your first hour in heaven, you will enjoy more wealth and more riches than he will in the whole of his life. You'll surpass him in that one instant. This is the kind of humility that God calls for from us. Not to be conceited, not to scoff at someone. I mean, a man of substance is a man of substance. And if you come around them or come across them, you know it very quickly. They carry themselves a certain way. They just do. You'll know it. Don't be intimidated by it. Don't be conceited towards it either. Walk in humility. That's a living soul, same as me. Right there. Never let yourself feel subservient or lesser than the wealthy, especially those who put on the gaudy display of wealth. Those are the kind of people it would be good to develop, in fact, a healthy contempt for. So I'm contradicting what I just said. That you shouldn't be mean to them or vicious to them. But there is a healthy contempt that believers ought to have. It's the same kind of thing I encourage our young people to learn, and that is a contempt of the cool. There's always this coolness around you, all right? And there are always those people who are the arbiters of cool and coolness. And everyone is expected to live up to their expectations. And you don't want to be caught wearing the brands that they despise, right? And so the next thing you know, everybody's got to wear, I don't even know what the brand is now. It changes, if you didn't notice. But I'm talking to a bunch of people who are not super brand conscious, so that's okay. It's good for you. Don't get that way. Don't get that way. There's nothing more insufferable than a guy who's got to wear Tommy Hilfiger everywhere he goes. It's just disgusting. And anyway, I was thinking, just give me some scissors and I'll cut that little flag off. And you can go. I'll put a patch on it. Help you with your manliness. Don't become that, and don't develop a healthy contempt. Not that you're going to respond maliciously because that's sinful, but just a contempt for it. And the same thing with people who like to show off their wealth. Just develop a contempt for it. All right? And at the same time, be ready to offer a hand to those in need around you. Again, we must not do this to impress people with our generosity or to add some points on our social credit score. We must do it for the good of those we're helping. That's the biblical way, that I do it not to be seen and not to get. I do it to bless, to help. And if it isn't beneath us to help the poor when they're in need, don't think it's out of our range or the range of possibility to help others whose station in life is above yours. Look, if you see a Tesla broken down by the road, you don't need to spit out your window as you drive by. You don't need to do that. For one thing, it might electrocute somebody, but you don't need to do that, all right? You don't need to yell, serve you right. Okay, you can stop and help them. In your little, you go, offer them a run. Say you want to go slum it for a little while. You want to see how the low lives live? Jump in, I'll help you. I'd go get you gas, but I guess that's not your problem. Listen, we have to do it for the good of those who have help, who have need. I've had billionaires ask me for money. I'm serious. I've had billionaires ask me, just say, I really need some money. Could you give it to me? And I almost did. I almost donated to Donald Trump, but I didn't. I didn't do it, even though he asked many times, asked me for money, I didn't do it. I mean, it's not like I didn't feel his need, I just didn't. I didn't do it. I decided to sit this one out, all right? But I have always thought, it's kind of neat to be able to say, I've had a billionaire ask me for money, he said how much he needed it. Be prudent in your giving. This is the third point of application. Be prudent in your giving. I am not against giving donations to political campaigns. I've done it. I don't do it often, but I have done it. Donations do buy you influence. If you give somebody $50, they're probably going to know your name. If you give them $100, they're going to give you their phone number. My recommendation when it comes to that is be strategic about these things. Don't let yourself get caught in the desire to be among the movers and shakers, to be one of the important guys in the room. And believe me, politicians know how to make you feel like you're the most important person ever, especially at fundraisers. But when there is a good cause, and when you can pitch in to make it happen, you should. And if you can give a nudge, a helpful nudge in the right direction, by giving a donation, give it. Money opens doors that would otherwise be shut to you. But then, the fourth point of application is never give in order to get. And yes, I know that sounds like I'm contradicting myself. You'll need plenty of wisdom to navigate all of these things. But the Bible does talk about both. Listen to Proverbs 17, verse 8. A gift is as a precious stone in the eyes of him that hath it. Whithersoever it turneth, it prospereth. And in Proverbs 18, verse 6, a man's gift maketh room for him, and bringeth him before great men. There is a strategic way to give donations to political campaigns that can enable you. This would be my rule. I'm not going to do it so that people will know my name. But I will do it if, number one, this guy is a conservative, rock solid. We need a guy like him. He's going to need money. I'll do it then. This guy here, if he'll listen. He might even call you and ask you what you think. and you will have a chance to influence him for right. That would be a time. But when I say never give in order to get, again, what I mean is, don't give a gift to buy yourself credit or to curry favor. If your point is self-aggrandizing, don't do it. Matthew Henry said, many have been beggared by foolish generosity, but never any by a prudent charity. Now, Jesus taught us this, and I'll close with it. Then said he also to him that bade him, when thou makest a dinner or a supper, call not thy friends, nor thy brethren, neither thy kinsmen, nor thy rich neighbors, lest they also bid thee again, and a recompense be made thee. But when thou makest a feast, call the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and thou shalt be blessed. For they cannot recompense thee, for thou shalt be recompensed at the resurrection of the just. Jesus also said, give to every man that asketh of thee, and of him that taketh away thy goods, ask them not again. And as ye would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise. For if ye love them which love you, what thank have ye? For sinners also love those that love them. And if ye do good to them which do good to you, what thank have ye? For sinners also do even the same. And if ye lend to them of whom ye hope to receive, what thank have ye? For sinners also lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love ye your enemies, and do good, and lend, hoping for nothing again. And your reward shall be great, and ye shall be the children of the highest, for he is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. Be therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. Let's have our missions report.